welcome to the Sackler space, to you lot in the audience, and to the people that are watching at home on YouTube. I'm Erica McCoy, and I'm a presenter here at the Roundhouse and Roundhouse Radio, and I'll be presenting tonight with Roderick Williams.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Erica. I'm Roderick Williams. I'm singing the role of Ulysses in the opera, but I'm also presenting this evening part of this insight with Erica here. And tonight we're going to take a look at the opera The Return of Ulysses by Claudio Monteverdi. We have an interesting program this evening. We've got Alexandra Coughlin, who's going to introduce us to Monteverdi and to early Italian opera. We've got members of the cast here who are going to sing a few items and also talk about their characters. We've got the director, John Fulljames, who's going to tell us about his vision of the piece. And we've also got some wonderful poets who are going to give us their response to the opera.
We want to hear from you, our audience at home, so do send in your comments. But at first, we're going to show you a preview of The Return of the Ulysses.
Much like this evening's Insight, The Return of Ulysses is a co-production between the Royal Opera and the Roundhouse and will be performed in the main space just next door from the 10th to the 21st of January next year. You can visit the Roundhouse website for details of how to book tickets and more information about the whole production. And now to tell us more about the exciting partnership between the Roundhouse and the Royal Opera House, would you please welcome the Chief Executive and Artistic Director of the Roundhouse, Marcus Davey. Thank you very much. Thank you for the microphone. Marcus, thank you very much for coming to join us. I have to admit, first of all, this is my first time in the Roundhouse. Could you tell me, please, a bit about the history of the place? Where am I?
You are in the northern part of Camden Town in Chalk Farm. The Roundhouse was originally built as a steam engine maintenance shed back in 1846. But like new technology, it only lasted for 8 years. And the great thing about the Roundhouse is that it's gone through a number of different guises. The longest guise in its whole history was as a bonded warehouse for whiskey and gin. Oh. Gilbey's owned it, and it was filled full of barrels of all that kind of stuff. Absolutely amazing. But it was in the 1960s when the playwright Arnold Wesker got hold of the building to turn it into an art centre for the people, and an extraordinary counterculture, a revolution of art started to happen. The psychedelia movement, the punk movement, the immersive theatre movement kind of really started and kicked off at the Roundhouse. But it all came to an end in 1983, and then the rebuilding of the Roundhouse into what it is today, we reopened it in 2006 with a brand new vision, which was about including young people at the very heart. So behind the wall that we're sitting in front of right now are the Paul Hamlin Roundhouse Studios, where we had 24 state-of-the-art studios, and last year we worked with 4,500 11 to 25-year-olds in music and poetry and radio and broadcast and theatre and circus and so on. And that's about not only the great artistic skills, but it's about life skills as well.
It's interesting for me because whenever I mention that I'm going to be performing at the Roundhouse, people say, yeah, isn't that a rock venue? Isn't it a rock venue?
Well, you know, the very great thing about the Roundhouse is that it's adaptable to many art forms. Yes, music, live music, rock music is a really important part of the programme, but we also do spoken word poetry, we do circus, we do theatre, we've commissioned great artists like Robert Lepage and Akram Khan. But, you know, when you've got the very biggest names in rock and roll music, they are going to shine so brightly that it actually dazzles people so much that they don't really see what else is happening here. So getting the message out there about the work that we do with young people or the other art forms we work in. So this summer, for instance, we commissioned Wayne McGregor to make an extraordinary new work of art with the company Random International. And then last January worked with Zoo Nation and, you know, a whole range of different companies coming here. And this is actually the second collaboration we've worked with the Royal Opera. So 3 years ago, we collaborated to make Monteverdi's Orfeo. And I think these are so important to show these incredible stories, these great operas, in a way that is immersive for the audience, but is already also engaging of young people who may never have been able to come into contact with such extraordinary work.
And this isn't the first time, as you say, that you've been in partnership with the Opera House. So how did that particular collaboration come about?
So the former director of opera, Caspar Holton, when he arrived in London, it came and said hello. And I said, wouldn't it be great? And he said, wouldn't it be great? Yes. And I said, yes, it would be great. And this is something that we'd love to do. And it turned out that the Opera House had never made productions of the 3 Monteverdi operas, and so we thought, wouldn't this be a great starting place to start with the earliest of the early, with Orfeo, and then work through those 3, and then see where that journey takes us. And the Orfeo was completely sold out, had fantastic responses, and was of incredible artistic quality, but it also engaged young people, emerging artists throughout of the making and the presentation as well.
And talking about engaging an artist, can you tell me a little bit about the poetic response to the opera as well?
Well, there's going to be something called a listening wall. And so when audiences come here, there's going to be this listening wall up in Torquil's bar, which is the bar upstairs, and you can go and listen to these responses by these extraordinary poets. In addition to that, all the broadcasting, young broadcast mentors being mentored through this to present tonight, yes. And also the opera itself as well. And also the chorus, of course.
Yes, yes. Tell me a little bit about them, because I haven't met any of them yet.
So the chorus is a collaboration between the Roundhouse Choir and through the community chorus from the Royal Opera House, coming together and are working on learning the choruses. But, you know, again, some people say, well, you know, is that the right thing to do? Well, I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, because you're working towards excellence. You're working with one of the greatest opera companies in the world, the Royal Opera. You're working in a space that, you know, people find absolutely extraordinary, and you're engaging young people to achieve something that they may never have thought they'd been able to achieve, and to a level of pure excellence as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Something for us all to take away there. Marcus, thank you so much for taking us through that. I'm very, very pleased to be in your building. Looking forward to the performances. It's now time for us to hear an extract from The Return of Ulysses. But before that, also, we have Marika, who's going to read us one of her responses to the opera.
I remember something of the color of the sky where it meets the sea, a meeting of old friends where the dusk now bleeds hollow promises. I remember the smell of jasmine in afternoon streets where the old man would stop to smile and nod, where the vines now grow into houses of grief. I remember the place we used to laugh and cry and drink wine to those days under the eternal sun, where dusty tables now stand bare beneath the limitless grey. I remember where I sat and thought of seeing you, thought of people I thought would always stay. I remember how the air tasted, and I remember how life was very long when nothing ever changed. And I remember dreaming of faraway lands, of travels and adventure and the future, gilt-edged and silver-tongued. I remember someone else, somewhere else, where I now stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Marika. That was incredible. That was really amazing. So now in just a moment, we'll hear members of the cast performing Melantho and Eurymachus's duet from Act 1, Scene 2. And another one of our poets, Clay, will be up here in a moment. But first, to set the scene, to kind of, you know, introduce you to it a little bit more, I would like for you to put your hands together for Alexandra Coughlin, who's going to give us a little bit more information about the Return of Ulysses.
So Claudio Monteverdi's 1639 opera, The Return of Ulysses, has been described by musicologists as an ugly duckling of a score, but also as the high point of Monteverdi's dramatic achievement, a score of Shakespearean breadth and scope. So which is it? When I come back to talk to you again in a little bit, I'd like to unpack that question a bit further to explore what sets Ulysses apart from Monteverdi's other surviving operas, and also from those that his contemporaries are writing at this point. But first, I've been asked just to tell you a little bit more about Monteverdi himself, and also to revisit the plot of Ulysses, just to provide some context for the characters you're about to meet and the musical extracts that you're about to hear. But first, Monteverdi. So I wonder, to begin with, when we talk about Monteverdi, which works you think about? Perhaps the three surviving operas, Orfeo, The Return of Ulysses, The Coronation of Poppea, perhaps the 9 books of madrigals, those astonishingly knotty depictions of human emotion and psychology, perhaps the 1610 Vespers, that enormous collection of sacred music, which with so many styles and so many different colours and textures, or perhaps the Selva Morale, with its lively string writing and brass writing as well as its vocal music. Claudio Monteverdi was a master of so many different arts, but there is a consistent thread, an idea that runs through all of it. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is this desire to communicate emotional truths, to express the human experience in music. Born in 1567, Monteverdi is very much the child of the Renaissance. He might have grown up going to church, hearing the polyphony of Lassus, of Palestrina, but by the time of his death in 1647, we're in a different world. This is the era of Giovanni Gabrieli, we're in the Baroque. And Monteverdi's music isn't just a passenger through that process, he's very much a catalyst. He's using his music to ask new questions and also to offer new answers dramatically and musically. His career, broadly speaking, divides into 2 separate sections. So up until 1613, he's based in Mantua, and then from that point until his death, he's based in Venice. His first professional job, once he left Cremona, his hometown, was at the court of Duke Vincenzo Gonzaga in Mantua. Now, the Duke was a very well-educated man, a great intellectual, who wanted his princely state to be the envy of all of Italy, of all of the other princes. He was a particular fan of classical music, and so he gathered around him this amazing collection of composers and performers. And it was actually as a performer rather than a composer that Monteverdi first entered his employ. But during the years he spent there, he had many opportunities to compose. He produced several books of madrigals, some of which he dedicated to the Duke. And also in 1606, he was commissioned to write his first opera, Orfeo, for the Duke. Then, in 1613, the Duke died, and unfortunately his successor wasn't quite so keen in investing quite so much money in the arts. Nothing changes. So Monteverdi was forced to seek employment elsewhere. So it was at that stage that he applied for and won the role of Maestro di Cappella at St. Mark's in Venice. So he traded the secular world of the court for the sacred space of the church. But he didn't give up secular music altogether. In about 1638, so he's aged 71 at this point, he entered this extraordinary sort of Indian summer of his creative life. He produced some of the greatest works that he's left to us, including Book 8 of the Madrigals, and also the trilogy of Venetian operas, of which only 2 survive, The Return of Ulysses and The Coronation of Poppea. In so many ways, these operas are the real beginnings of modern opera. If you look at the processes, the priorities, the styles we're using now to express ourselves musically, they have a lot more in common with Monteverdi than anything that came in between. Opera seria, bel canto, grand opera. I want to come back again and talk to you a bit more about that later on. But first, a very quick whiz through the plot of The Return of Ulysses. So it's an adaptation of Homer's Odyssey, but not the entire thing. So we pick up the story in about book 13, at the point where Ulysses sets foot back in Ithaca, his homeland, and we run through to the end of book 23, where he is reunited with his wife Penelope. It's very true to the original, except in terms of its dramatic weighting, and it's perhaps reweighted in a way we wouldn't expect of the composer of Orfeo. We might imagine him to be most interested in sort of the elevated passions of Ulysses and his wife Penelope, of the doings of the gods, but actually what he does is to sort of shift the camera, to pan out and to give us this much more democratic vision of society. We're interested in the lowlifes, the really grubby, grotesque people at the bottom of the food chain, as much as we are in the gods. And I think this shows a real shift of priorities from Orfeo, and we can see that we're beginning to head towards Poppea here. That being said, the prologue, we begin in the world of the gods. Human frailty is being taunted by three of the gods, time, fortune, and love, all of whom say we have the most power over her. So a lovely little allegory for what is going to come next. We then jump in Act 1 to the palace of Ithaca, where Penelope has been waiting 20 years for the return of her husband. Her maid, Ericlea, her nurse, I should say, says, well, forget about him, that you have all of these suitors, marry somebody else. Penelope says no. Her maid Melanto is also preoccupied by love, and she and her lover Eurymachus try and scheme to see if they can persuade their mistress to take a new wife. Meanwhile, Ulysses has been abandoned on the shores of Ithaca by some sailors. Conveniently, he meets his patroness, the goddess Minerva, who reveals to him what's happened in his absence and persuades him to disguise himself as a beggar and go to the palace and vanquish the suitors. She leaves him to go and fetch his son Telemachus from Sparta in her magic chariot. He then goes to see the shepherd Eumaeus. He tells him, still in disguise, Ulysses has returned and orders him to go and tell Penelope that her husband is returning. Act 2 starts with the reunion between Telemachus and Ulysses, one of the most touching moments in the opera. But we then jump back to the palace, where Melanto and Eurymachus have despaired of trying to persuade their mistress to do anything, so they're consoling themselves with their own rather more wanton love affair. Eumaeus arrives, he conveys his message, but Penelope is suspicious. She doesn't believe her husband is truly back. Ulysses himself then arrives, still disguised, and Iro, this sort of filthy, gluttonous hanger-on, he senses some competition here at the bottom of the food chain, and he challenges Ulysses to a duel. Ulysses is triumphant and is welcomed by Penelope, who then suggests a competition. She says, if anyone can string my husband's bow successfully, I will give him my hand in marriage. One by one, the suitors are tempted, and they all fail. Ulysses, still disguised as the beggar, is the last one to go. Of course, he is successful and proceeds to kill all of the suitors. Final act starts with Iro, our hanger-on. He's so distressed, there's nobody left to feed him, and without without food, life is not worth living. So he heads off to kill himself. Penelope is also distressed, but for rather more serious reasons. Despite Ericlea, despite Telemachus, she still cannot believe this is her husband who has returned. And it's only finally when he describes to her in great detail the embroidery on their marriage bed, the coverlet that covers it, that she really believes that he's returned, and they sing this ecstatic love duet.
Time in, time out, time and time again. Surprise, surprise, time, my ever-present friend. How goes it? Whoa, 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 whoa. Slowly, slowly. It seems you a strange abandoned. Pulverizing mortals you've forgotten, yet still they wish you'd stay to land. Ah, fortune. Our fortune lay a fortune on me, abundance overflowing from me. Yea, fortune heard and fortune saw me. Indeed, foresaw and foreheard fortune for me. Since when was love so sinister? Oft more I'd seek love a protector. Love my shield, love I serve, not a raving vengeance to be swerved. Love my shield, love I serve, not a raving vengeance to be swerved. You've seen his face, you'll see his face. A face filled with fear, just brave enough to run away year after year. Truly I pity the fella. Mortal and shaken, wholly mistaken, an aging, impertinent bugger. Alas, I digress. It's been too long since we've all bore witness together. Let's rally and merry. Ulysses is gone, and all the better.
To shudder, keep on singing, my darling. Your song is thrilling. It is thrilling, fulfilling. And your beauty, and your beauty, and your beauty has magical glamour. Lovely, lovely, melancholy, lovely, 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 melancholy, praise and charmer. My heart is bound in chains. I sigh and languish when they break what remains. When they break what remains, when they break what remains, is cruel anguish. How wickedly you flatter, you enrich my beauty, turning eyes into diamonds, and mouth to rose, more red than a ruby, and the skin of her silver tongue, the silver tongue. Oh, the skin of her silver tongue, the silver tongue, that made me sigh. Ever softly, ever softly. I don't care if you're lying. The only lie that I could tell you would be I do not love you. To deny that I strive for a goddess from on high is a craven-hearted lie. Our love is bright as sunlight. It is a shine. It is sunlight. It is a shining soul. Our love is like the sunlight. It is a shining soul. Refusing love for love is low and cruel. Refusing love for love is low and cruel. Refusing love for love, refusing love for love, refusing love, refusing love is low and cruel. Yet when you give a lover your heart, you must be ready to weep and suffer. Listen, oh, you must, my darling, I hunger for your embrace at every evening, so you can feel, you can feel, you can feel my heart beating. Listen, oh, the land might gladly change its mansion for a desert, where crying waters could not spy, could not spy, could not spy on our heavenly misdemeanors. When lovers must be patient, they may God of supplication. When lovers must be patient, they may God of supplication. When lovers must be patient, when lovers must be patient, they may die of frustration. Till your mistress takes a suitor, we cannot lie together. She is cold as marble. I'll find ways happy we two together. Love is a bond, a tender bond. Love is a bond, not to be broken, not to be broken.
Thank you to Clay, who performed the poetry before, and Francesca, Chiagina, and Andrew taught us, and Timothy Burke, who's sung that, for that. That was really incredible. Tell me a little bit about the characters that you're playing in this piece.
Alexandra touched on it earlier. Melanto is the maid of Penelope, and my character Eurymachus is her lover, and we're trying to convince Penelope to accept a suitor, because as we sang in the music just now, my character said, "Till your mistress takes a suitor, we cannot lie together." So kind of sex is the big motivation for for the whole thing, really.
And tell me a little bit more about your character.
Melanto, she's a bit wild, as you maybe heard. She's kind of a maid in training, so she doesn't really know how to be appropriate and the appropriate things to say. But her main goal, like he said, is to get with Eurymachus, and Penelope's whining and groaning is getting in the way. Mm-hmm. So,
Francesca, from just chatting to you before, you don't seem like someone that's like similar to your character in any way. So, what have you found difficult about your part in the opera? Have you found anything difficult? Is it difficult?
That's kind of great that you spotted that. I'm trying to embody this character. She's young and kind of just will say the first thing that comes to her mind, and is always happy and talking and chatting, and that's kind of the opposite of me. But I'm embracing finding empathy and having the fun that comes with someone who's so open and free. So it's more of a fun exploration than a chore or anything.
And Andrew, can you identify with anything in the character of this piece? Is there anything that's kind of like...
Well, I sang this role in a production for Welsh National Opera a number of years ago, and the director had me as a pimp in a zoot suit. I mean, it kind of makes sense. The interesting thing about the Monteverdi is that the music is so heartfelt. In the bit where we kind of do that sort of fast speaking thing, there's that interval of the fifth. And I always think in Monteverdi, that fifth, that comes back later when Telemachus and Ulysses are reunited. Yeah. And I feel that's kind of, that he uses that interval as a kind of means of pricking up the audience's ears as something heartfelt is about to happen, or something touching. So, I mean, he's a very... He likes the sound of his own voice, and he's trying his utmost to convince Melanto, to in turn convince Penelope to kind of, loosen up a bit. I don't know whether there's much of me in that sort of role, but it's been fun. We've had a lot of fun kind of so far in the rehearsals, haven't we? Yeah. Experimenting.
And Roderick, you're here, so you can't ignore you and your part.
I'm still here.
What, do you connect with anything in the opera yourself?
Well, excuse me. All the men singers here just coughing and as we have to. Well, do you know, there's something about Ulysses being away from home. Admittedly, in the story, 20 years plus, because there was the siege of Troy to be had first, and then it's taken him 20 years to get back home. Now, I can't claim to have been away from home for 20 years exactly, but I do connect with the part of him that is constantly going and then coming back. And it's an interesting thing for me because my family survive well without me. It's partly, if I might just say to camera, as it were, because my wife is there as a rock to keep the children going as they've grown up and they're teenagers and older now. And they are as sane as they are because my wife has been there for them while I've been gallivanting around the world. So it's interesting for me to come back and find that life has been continuing without me, that they don't all come rushing up saying, "Oh, Daddy, we've missed you, where have you been?" No, they get on with their life. Yeah. So it's interesting for me to come into rehearsals and find a son, Telemachus, that I haven't seen for 20 years. The last time I saw him, he was presumably a tiny little boy, a little baby almost. And then we have this emotional scene that Alexander referred to as a very tender moment when I identify this young man, and I think this must be my son. It's a very strange thing. So there's a lot of imagination as well going on with bits of myself.
Roderick, you kind of briefly mentioned that you were coughing. How long does it take to train for something like this? Is there like has it singing just kind of, is your throat okay? How long does it take to train for something like this? Can I just turn around and join the opera?
Yes, please. Yes. Particularly, of course, if you're singing in the chorus, in the community chorus, because that's really handy to have people. As something that Marcus was saying earlier on about the people striving for excellence. But all of us, I'm sure, have similar, but if slightly different stories. Similar stories about working and training through choirs, maybe. I don't know if that's your experience too. Instruments. Yeah. You're an instrumentalist first, and then into singing. So you train as a musician, all-round musician. It takes, of course, it's a lifetime in a sense, and each piece takes a while to sing. You mentioned that you'd sung this role before, which gives you an idea of how the notes go. Did you sing it in Italian then?
I sang it in Italian, but I mean, more than that, I think it gives you an idea of the geography of the whole piece.
Yes, exactly.
Which is quite useful, particularly if, like we were talking about before, we don't actually sing together, really.
No. I hardly sing with you, do I? No. Nice to meet you, though. Yeah. It's a strange thing. How do you find the English translation, both of you, actually talking specifically about putting it into English?
This is my first time with the role, actually. So I've looked at the Italian libretto, but I know it in English first. So it might be interesting to relearn it in Italian to see what.
To do it that way round. Yeah. Yes.
I mean, I think it helps that it's the style that it is with the kind of the secco recitatives, because I think sometimes, on occasion, when you translate something into English, which has got longer lines and sort of longer phrases, sometimes the translation can jar on occasion, even when it's done really well. But I think in this, it's helped by the kind of medium.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know.
It's Chris Cowell who's done it, and it's an extraordinary job. I might just say the one thing that has flagged up is the name of the title character, Ulisse in Italian and Ulysses we all know in English. So what Christopher has done, he's matched up word for word in the score. Whenever Ulisse is mentioned, to that rhythm, Ulisse, he's matched up Ulysses. So that's one moment where we found ourselves tripping slightly. But Monteverdi is so specific and so clear in the score when he mentions the name that Christopher couldn't ignore that. So you might find yourself... do you refer to me by name in the show?
I don't ever say your
name. You get away with it.
You're dead to me,
Likewise. But I do find myself using my own name a great deal because I'm trying to persuade people in the opera that it's really me. So I'm having to refer to myself. It is Ulysses. We'll come back to that.
And we're going to have the director, John Fulljames, up here in a minute. But what has it been like working with him? He is in the room, so be careful.
It's been very, very good.
Amazing.
They've been told to say that. How has it been, honestly? As in, like, seriously, like, a serious question.
Well, seriously, it has been amazing.
Yeah.
He's so collaborative and open to building it together, which has been exciting. And as a less experienced singer, it's pushing me to ask questions that I've never asked of a character, and
And is that sort of asking? I imagine asking questions, researching, that is a massive part of your character and
Asking
your
why
job.
would I say this at this time?
Yeah.
What do you think I really mean by saying this? Like, psychology, basically.
And also, we've been talking on that matter about things that our characters don't say. That because we have the libretto and we read through it and we sing it and we learn it. Sometimes it takes someone like John to point out that there are things that aren't done. For example, when Telemachus and Ulysses meet, father and son, after all this time, there's a very touching scene. We've alluded to that already, but many things are not said that you might expect someone to say, having met their son for the first time in 20 years. And it's interesting how the libretto skirts around certain things. John, as you're saying, Francesca, John is asking questions of us a lot of the time. In learning my role on my own, away from others, I hear the music in a certain way. What I might say is the obvious way, the initial way. The music might bounce in a very happy way. And I think, oh, well, this is happy, jolly music. And then John might say, but is it? Is your situation that happy? So he's asking all the questions to help us to examine what's really going on. Very interesting.
Something that is, with it being a collaboration with the Roundhouse and there being so many young people that use the Roundhouse, is there any sort of, how does it connect to maybe young people, but how does it connect to people in general? This opera was written ages ago, so why would it connect with anyone here today or in this room? What's the connection? Is there any connections that you've seen?
I think I can answer that because I got a little tip off before the rehearsals started. Actually, something in the translation that Christopher had put in for my character, I explained myself very early on. I am an exile, a refugee, is how I explain myself. And that use of the word refugee, you open the newspaper today and there are refugees on every page from across in the Mediterranean, which is of course where this was initially set, but in this particular production translation, a lot of references to specific places are removed. And so it could be anywhere, it could be quite literally anywhere in the world. And as I say, the news is full of the plight of people who are leaving one war-torn country to arrive in another, and are either being let in or they are being barred from finding what they're after. So in that sense, without John needing this to be a heart-on-sleeve piece about the plight for today, please sign here with your donations, it's not that. It's simply that it is relevant to anywhere that has seen war and has seen displacement.
Yeah, well, also I think that Monteverdi was writing about things that we still feel now, all the subjects that he is so brilliant at.
It's so emotive.
Yeah, the things that he brings to life and the way that he colours the music to suggest longing or lust or fear or whatever it is. It's so brilliantly poignant and perfectly judged that I think it just speaks very, very clearly even now.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's been really great chatting to you lot, and I could chat to you guys all night. But we're going to have to round up the interview here. Thank you so much.
Later tonight, we're going to hear from John Fulljames, the director of this new production. We're also going to hear more musical performance and spoken performance. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to add your comments, which I think we may have...
We did. Well, I read them out. I read out someone's comment.
Oh, did you?
I accidentally didn't mention their name, though. But thank you so much for sending me your comment.
Well, there's still time
Yeah.
to contact us more, and we'll be able to read things out towards the end of the streaming. Now, in just a moment, Benjamin Lewis and Timothy Burke will perform Ulysses' Awakening aria, and Shola Marie will perform her poem in response to the opera. But first, Alexandra Coughlin is going to tell us a little bit more about Claudio Monteverdi and about early Italian opera.
So if you were to open the 17th century volume of Richard Taruskin's The Oxford History of Western Music, which is an enormous book, to the first chapter, you would find a chapter entitled From Monteverdi to Monteverdi. That's a bit of a musicologist's joke. It's not terribly good, but it is quite true. What he's getting at here is that the composer of Orfeo in 1606 and the composer of Ulysses and Poppea at the very end of Monteverdi's life are essentially two completely different people. The musical processes, the priorities, the dramatic priorities have completely changed. So what's gone on in the interim? Why has Monteverdi gone through this enormous process of change? It's mostly to do with context. So as I discussed earlier, Orfeo was written in 1606 for the Gonzaga court in Mantua. It was a private commission to celebrate the carnival. It would be performed in front of an invited audience of aristocrats in a private home. So what's the function of a piece like that? Well, firstly, it's supposed to reflect the power of its commissioner. So you might have a large chorus and a large orchestra to reflect, the depth of his wallet, essentially. It's also got to reflect him morally and intellectually. It's got to be lofty. Interestingly, it's subtitled a favola in musica, a musical fable. So it's it's entertaining, but it's also edifying. It's educational. It's not going to be risque. It's not going to go anywhere too dangerous, just in case it would reflect badly on the Duke himself. Because you've got the very small audience also, it's designed musically for that smaller space. Recitative is the basic currency of the music. It's conversational, it's intimate, as befits that environment. But by the time we arrive at Ulysses, we're in a completely different world. This was the first opera that Monteverdi wrote for the public theatres in Venice, a completely new innovation at this point. So suddenly you have an audience who is here for entertainment. They've paid good money and they want to see something, back for it. So the themes are changing, the plots are changing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But it's a public spectacle and in a much larger space. So musically, you've got to sort of adapt to fill that. It's no coincidence that the castrato and the diva soprano are both kind of born in this era, because for the first time, composers are writing music that sort of amplifies them, that gives them this platform for showing off for brilliance. And there's also the small question of profit, though. If we spoke earlier about the deep pockets of a private donor, when you're putting on a commercial spectacle, obviously you want to see some return on your investment. So what happens? Well, the orchestra shrinks right back, so we have maybe 5 or 6 instruments, and you can forget about the chorus because they're far too expensive, so you lose them altogether. Now, this is all happening in Venice, and there's a reason it's happening in Venice as opposed to anywhere else. Venice is, of course, in this period a republic. It's not a princely state. It's a very liberal environment. It's full of a lot of money. You've got this huge merchant class as well as the aristocrats who've all got disposable income, and they want to put it somewhere, to buy themselves something shiny with it. And an evening of opera sort of fits the bill. So this is the moment, this is the point in history, this is the place where opera goes from being a rich man's plaything to being entertainment for the masses. Now, in 1637, the Teatro San Cassiano was the first public theatre to be opened in Venice. It was a tremendous success, and by the end of that decade, there were 16 commercial theatres. Now, if you think about the size of Venice, a city able to support 16 ventures, and that's across both spoken theatre and opera, is quite astonishing, and it gives you some measure, I suppose, of the popularity of this new genre. Now, I've already hinted a little bit at, what this new opera sounded like, what it looked at, but just to draw out some of those ideas a bit further. So we're moving away from recitative, from intimate conversational style, into a slightly more expansive, lyricism, song is becoming the basic sort of, I suppose, dramatic currency of exchange between characters. These plots that are full of sex and violence and comedy is also a new element, actually coming from Rome at this point in opera. That's new and exciting, and also the spectacle of it. If you look at some of the sources, the books, the manuscripts we have from the theatres in this period, the details, the technical drawings for the machinery to allow a chariot to fly in, or in this opera, an eagle sort of flies over the head of the suitors. Minerva and Telemachus arrive from the sky in a chariot. All of these things are the big hitting, the big sort of sell for the opera. People would go home and tell their friends, you must go and see this show because it's got this great bit with an eagle. So this is very much the context. This is the place in which Ulysses is born. But if you think about Monteverdi, he's left this secular environment quite a long time ago. He hasn't written an opera for a while. What is the push? What's the thing that gets him back into the theatre? Because it's slightly complicated for a man with such a position in the church to be dabbling in this commercial world. It's a very specific impetus. And I'm going to read you a little bit of a letter which might help explain it. The letter's actually written in 1640 after the premiere. But I'll read it to you, and hopefully things will become clear. So, to the most illustrious and most reverend Signor Claudio Monteverdi, great master of music, not in order to compete with those talented men who, in recent years, have published their compositions in the Venetian theatres, did I initially dedicate myself to writing The Return of Ulysses, but to stimulate the imagination of your lordship, to make known to this city that in warming the affections, there is a great difference between a real sun and a painted one. Now, having seen the opera performed 10 times, I can positively and heartily affirm that my Ulysses is more obligated to your lordship than the real Ulysses was to Minerva. We admire, with greatest astonishment, those rich ideas of yours, though not without some perturbation, because I can scarcely recognise the work as mine. So that letter comes from one Giacomo Badoaro, who is an aristocrat. He's a member of a very elite sort of academy in Venice at this point, whose role is to promote opera. He was obviously a great fan of Monteverdi's, and he was watching these kind of young pretenders like Cavalli, Monteverdi's pupil, coming up through the ranks, and thought, these guys, they're fake, they're painted sons. I want to stimulate the real thing to come back and bring his genius back to the stage. So he submits this libretto to Monteverdi, who takes the bait, but he does it very much on his own terms. He takes Badoaro's 5-act structure, which is a bit blousy, it's a bit loose at the edges, it's a lot about doing, there's a lot of action going on, and he sort of transforms it into something much more intimate and much more thoughtful. It's about thinking and feeling as much as it is about doing. Ulysses and Penelope, our hero and heroine, they're not, the allegories of Orfeo, they're not spirits or gods, they're very real human people, they're very recognisable, and they're very contemporary. Emily Wilson's new translation of the Odyssey has just come out and is creating a huge stir, and I was reading the beginning of it this week, and she starts off, "Tell me about a complicated man." And that directness, that vernacular, that sort of cutting straight to the heart of this, the froth and the mythology that exists around this story, that is exactly what Monteverdi was doing 400 years ago. It's precisely the same motivation, the same reasons. And again, that breadth, that social democracy I was talking about earlier, widening the lens to include everyone in this story, not just the highborn people. That's also, I think, essentially, you were asking earlier about what's contemporary about this piece. That's what's contemporary. It's Shakespearean. It's interested in human motivation wherever it comes from. Now, a new dramatic focus obviously needs new musical style to go with it. And just for 2 minutes before I finish, I just want to sort of whip through why this opera is different musically from what we've seen before. So for a start, it's much more fluid. If you think about what comes afterwards, opera seria, Handel, you tend to have set pieces. So someone sings something, somebody sings something else. We stop, we contemplate a tree. Monteverdi isn't interested in stopping and contemplating a tree. He's driving us through. There's a real sense of pace, of teleology, and a plot that not a lot really happens here until the suitors start being murdered. But you can't look away, you can't be bored, because this emotional flow moving from recitative into kind of arioso, into duet, into ensemble is constantly on the move. You never quite know where you are. And that's unsettling, but it's also very exciting. The connection between music and character is also something here that's new. Every character in this opera has their own musical language. Penelope, there's a wonderful phrase by Tim Carter, the Monteverdi scholar. He describes her as being caged in her recitative. She's a woman who's thrust her emotions so far down, she's so repressed, she's holding on to this love so deep that she can't break out into song, she kind of can't release herself, because if she does, I think she's going to be lost. So through the whole opera, right up until that final love duet, she sings in these very dry, kind of broken, sort of dusty phrases. Her husband arrives, and suddenly there's this sensual woman kind of appears again. By contrast, Melanto and Eurymachus, as we've already touched on, they have this very sensual, very flowering, song-like language. I think there's a real elision here between sexual freedom and license and song at this point. Eumaeus, a shepherd, he also sings songs, but not in quite such a sexy way. It's more a folk song, it's more traditional, it's kind of instinct. Iro, the horrible glutton, the hanger-on, he's like the Falstaff of Monteverdi. He has a stutter, so whenever he tries to express himself in the grand language of his patrons that he's copying, he can't quite get it right. He trips over his own feet, he's ungainly. And his great lament about the lack of food at the beginning of Act 3 is this kind of musical parody of Penelope's in Act 1, which is terribly sincere. So there's a lovely kind of dramatic pivot from one to the other. And just to finish up, Penelope and Ulysses, it's worth saying that although they are, the king and queen, they're terribly lofty, they don't express themselves in the kind of flowery language you might expect. They're very simple, they're very direct. And in contrast to that, the suitors, these kind of courtiers, they're very slimy, they're up for what they can get, they're all about appearance rather than reality. They're the ones who kind of perfume and scatter their music with all of these kind of ornaments. When it's true emotion, you don't need all of that. So, Ulysses, as far as I'm concerned, an opera very much ahead of its time, an opera that prioritizes psychological truth over sort of empty beauty. I think that's why we find it uncomfortable. I think that's why it hasn't had quite the same dramatic currency as the very sexy Poppea or the kind of charming little Orfeo. But as far as I'm concerned, it's that sort of that discomfort that makes it so contemporary, that makes it live so long in your memory after you've seen a performance.
My body is a battered nation, dragged to war by pride, burning on the altar of regrettable sacrifice. My ego will boast and die. In darkness, I perch on the backside of this bony hill, overlooking the vast ocean of my unwise decisions, dispersed across the earth like diamonds scattered across a vault of endless navy blue. I have made mistakes. My body quakes at the very thought of it. The very tip of the memory is enough to slaughter any hint of a smile on this beaten face. Edges of my dry mouth begin to curl at the sight of shadowy figures waltzing on the horizon. But no sooner do they appear than my creased lips shatter. Hope crashes into the water and the figures are blown into fragments stolen by the wind. My sweet dreams unrolling at the seams of this hooked body. Unhinged. My body is a battered nation, dragged to war by pride, burnt on the altar of regrettable sacrifice. My ego boasts and dies.
Dreaming? Am I dreaming? Am I woken? What surroundings are these? What air moves on the breeze? Where is the shore I walk on? Am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? Am I dreaming? Have I woken? And who has spoken from me the sleep I long for? And turned a soothing light to a merciless assassin, who translated my rest to waking torments, which God above should guard our sleeping moments. Oh, sleep, oh, mortal sleep, our dreams are your children, death is your brother, transported and abandoned, deluded and despondent. I have learned your real name and I know you, father of errors, I am guilty. I knew shadows were the sisters of darkness, yet looked for mercies from insubstantial phantoms. I lost and squander my breath in curses. Gods of pitiless hatred, gods with rage unabated, plague the sleep of Ulysses with terrible visions. Every divine decision should curb human pride, let none deny it. Allow the dead, alas, eternal quiet.
Thank you to Shola and Benjamin Lewis and Timothy Burke for that. That was incredible. Okay, so now for some exciting stuff. Director John Fulljames is going to join us on the sofa, and we're going to unpick this production. We're going to talk about it right about now. It's going to be so fun. There you go. There's your mic. Okay, so you've had a connection with the Royal Opera House for a while. Do you want to tell us about how you got involved with the Royal Opera House to start with, and just introduce yourself?
So I first got involved with the Royal Opera House when I guess I was about 20, and I was at university, and I sort of thought, cool, what am I going to do this summer? So I wrote them a letter and said, could I come and observe what your stage managers do? And I think it was maybe when the building was closed. I remember being in a big film studio out of town, watching these huge rehearsal rooms with, a chorus of 60 people and, tables and tables of stage managers and directors and fight choreographers and language coaches and assistant conductors, and just being kind of blown away by the scale of the machine. The sense that what was going on was an enormous kind of artistic enterprise of all these people working together in an extraordinarily focused way to make one moment of magic when a singer sings a particular note in a particular way, so it hits an audience kind of in their solar plexus. So that's where my relationship with the Opera House started, and then I guess I did lots of assistant directing at the Opera House, and then they gave me some little shows to direct, and then they trusted me a bit more, and I was given a chance to direct amazing things like The Return of Ulysses.
Amazing. And I had a little sneak peek of the Royal Opera House the other day, last week, and I was astonished by how big it is, and I think people don't realise what goes, you see what's on stage and you go, wow, it's amazing. But then actually seeing backstage is something completely different. Tell us a bit about your influences in this particular piece that you're creating for the Roundhouse in this amazing space upstairs.
Sure. So the Roundhouse, just like the Royal Opera House, is a machine. It's a big industrial building. I think what's thrilling about staging Monteverdi in here is that this is such a democratic space. There surely is no more democratic space than a space in the round. So I think it's the ideal space to respond to the ideas which Alexandra was talking about in the opera. The auditorium we can create is a Greek theatre, it is a Roman theatre, it's a theatre where every seat is the best seat in the house. It's not a theatre where there's a downstairs and there's an upstairs and there's audience over there who can't quite see the stage. Everybody has the best possible seat. And it's not a theatre with an orchestra pit. You know, I think it's really important that this is music theatre in which the musicians are kind of an active part of the theatre, of the visual language. And musically, you know, because it's building out from chamber music, it feels absolutely right that singer and musician should be really close together.
That's what you've done for this, right?
We've kept them really close together. One of the things we wrestled with for a long time was kind of where to put the orchestra. Because as soon as you place a conductor, in this case Christian Kernin, who's going to be leading from the harpsichord, you kind of define the front, you know, because singers tend to gravitate to the conductor, not to look at them all the time, of course. Yeah. But you know, just to keep an eye, that connection's really important. And so we wanted to find a way that we could place Christian without defining a front. So what we decided to do in the end, very much inspired by the Roundhouse architecture, was to put the orchestra on a revolve so that they will move slowly, slowly, slowly in space. And hopefully, if you didn't watch the Insight event or you're not here this evening, you won't notice. But you'll just think after about half an hour, hang on, that's not where the orchestra were when they started. Which I think is a really powerful metaphor for the way that time works in the piece. You know, the piece has such a strong sense of time passing. Everybody's looking back over their shoulder. You can't escape your past.
You kind of mentioned time. What other themes have you tried to explore and really, you know, bring out in this piece that we're going to see upstairs upstairs between the 10th and 21st January, if you book a ticket?
So one of the big choices we had to make was about how to cut it. You know, it was a long experience in Venice. It was a 4-hour experience. You know, and I don't think that's the sort of experience which most of us want today when we go to the theatre. So we had to focus the drama. And what we chose to do was to cut out the gods, to excise the gods. Partly because there's a set of knowledge, of baggage, of loose ends which flow out from the gods into the rest of, if you like, Greek mythology. And I felt that required a set of contextual knowledge which we didn't necessarily want to have, or we didn't necessarily want the programme to have to explain. But also, you know, it's again picking up on what Alexandra said, this is a human drama. You know, this is a drama which absolutely focuses on the real flesh and blood lives of a set of human beings. And I think the key theme in that context is that they are a set of human beings who are living in the shadow of conflict. They carry with them the physical, psychological damage of effectively 20 years of warfare. So 10 years when Ulysses was going to Troy, was at Troy, the siege of Troy, and then 10 years when he's been looking for home. You know, and I don't think he's alone in that. I think the consequence of that conflict, which in Greek terms was on the other side of the world, you know, it was on the other side of the Mediterranean, but it was on the other side of the world. That conflict, of course, is on the doorstep of his home. You know, Ithaca has changed while he was gone. In the 20 years that he wasn't there, a set of people have arrived who were not there 20 years ago. And so when he comes home, I think he finds a place which looks totally different.
Well, that aria that Ben sang just a moment ago, he's saying about, you know, what beach is this, what's surrounding it, what air do I breathe? It's his own country. He just doesn't recognise it. I think that's hugely sad for him as a character as well. Can I just ask, also, just picking up something that you were saying, you've referred to we as a team making decisions about this. You've also mentioned Christian Kernin conducting the early opera group from the harpsichord. Who were your creative team and how did you find them?
So there's quite a big team. There's a set designer, Hemi Shin, Limbury Prize winner. I found her because I saw her work at the Young Vic. Brilliant designer. Fantastic, clean, contemporary aesthetic. Really good storytelling brain. Costume designer Kimi Nakano, who's well known to Roundhouse audiences. She designed the costumes for Akram Khan's show, which was here last year. Yeah. And then the best lighting designer in the world, Paulie Constable. Every shade of white. You're going to see it.
She knows them all.
Yeah. Light. We live in the age of light. You can tell so many stories with light, the angle of light, the way light changes, and Paulie is the master of that. The other people on the team are Sound Intermedia, a sound design company. Normally in operas you don't have sound design companies, but to make acoustic music work in this space, in the round, we need to use a lot of technology. So we use a lot of technology which then is totally invisible. The most beautiful thing about Orfeo 3 years ago was nobody had a clue it was amplified. It felt like a totally acoustic experience. And I think that's really important so that, you guys, when you sing, really connect to us viscerally.
Yes. And we don't make any allowances for when we sing for the amplification. So it's not as if I'm thinking, that's great, I don't need to sing this aria because I'll just hum it and it'll go out there. But at the same time, as I throw myself around the stage, which we might even describe, I don't know if we're allowed to say about it, but as I throw myself about the stage in the round, I know that I can face anywhere. And as you said, everybody will get the same sound, for better or worse, but people will hear the same music. Dare we talk about the set?
Yeah, let's talk about the set. So we've got a really confusing set. So the Roundhouse is round, so our set is round, and our set goes round. And so nobody has a clue where they are. And we have to find a way to solve this before Paulie needs to start plotting her lights, basically. It's sort of obvious, isn't it? If you are staging a piece about an idea of home, that the centre is really important, the magnet, the place everybody's gravitating to. If the Roundhouse wasn't here, we would have built a round space. This piece is crying out to be staged in the round.
Yes. And it's been extremely liberating and also quite freaky to work on, because in the room, obviously, you at your desk, you as the director and your directing team can only see one angle. And as you mentioned also that we singers tend to present to the people who are watching. So we have, wherever the revolve goes, we tend to end up trying to sing to you, and then we realise, no, the audience is everywhere. So I've seen the last couple of days, you've managed to put various members of the whole team, the stage management assistants, and whomsoever's in the room, all around, to remind us that we can sing and face anywhere, that no one place is more important than the other. Making blocking a small issue, because by the time I've worked out where I am, I've moved. The thing has moved, so yeah.
I mean, it's the sort of story for which you want an empty space. It's the sort of, because it's Shakespearean, think of the Globe, you just want floorboards. You just want a space within which you can focus on the performers and the relationships between the performers. And so again, being in the round feels like the best thing.
Have you kept the set quite simplistic then, with that? Or is it quite an extravagant set?
The set's really simple. And within that, the singers, I think, are in a set of costumes by Kimi, which feel contemporary. It feels as if this piece is happening today. It's happening somewhere in the Mediterranean, somewhere hot, somewhere which is a place living with the legacy of war, the consequences of war.
English is a language that's almost kind of universal. Is there a reason why you decided that English is going to be the way we're going to do it for this, or was there an option to do it in Italian?
No, we were really clear from the start. It has to be in English.
Yeah.
This opera is so text-led. It feels like the most fantastic thing tonight to have heard this spoken word work, because that is Monteverdi.
Yes.
The way that text, when performed turns into rhythm and has song in it, and the music emerges from the text, and when text becomes lyrical, it carries emotion. I mean, that's exactly what's going on with Monteverdi. And the idea that we would have an English-speaking cast singing in Italian, trying to communicate through super titles to an English audience, I mean, it's just crazy. So I'm thrilled we're doing it in English, and it makes the experience so immediate. I think people sometimes think, I'm not going to go to the opera because I won't know what's going on. I won't be able to hear the words. As amazingly brilliant as Alexandra's synopsis was earlier. I mean, that was so clinically, amazingly fantastic. It's a long story. It's a complicated story. But, then so is Star Wars. But you don't worry when you're going to go and see Star Wars, will I follow the story? Because it's in your language and the storytelling's really good.
Yeah. I just want to say, from my point of view, how amazing it has been to hear the poets and their spoken words, because actually much of what they said in their poetry is what we've been discussing in the last few days. So they're just adding extra layers for me, extra resonance and thought processes, almost word for word in one or two cases. Did you pick that up? So it was really fascinating to hear those. Yeah.
I'm really intrigued by the community singers. Why community singers? Why the choir from the Roundhouse? Why did you want to bring that into that space?
All right, there's really two reasons. The first connects back to the ideas of democracy, which Alexandra was talking about, the ideas we were talking about in the space. I think to see that democracy on stage, to see that sense that the people on stage are the people in the audience is so powerful. Yes, Monteverdi didn't write for a big chorus, but for me, chorus is central to what opera is. Opera is powerful because it operates on an emotional level and it operates on a political level, that those two things go hand in hand. And I think its political level is directly related to the presence of the chorus, a sense that you see on stage a nation. And I think in this piece, which is all about ideas of home, who belongs here, whose nation is this, who has a responsibility to this nation, who has a right to this nation. It felt as if there was a set of ideas in the piece which would respond really powerfully to a chorus. And then there was a thing in the piece I wanted to really investigate, and that is the suitors. So we've talked a lot about the humanity in the piece, about how it's a piece which takes the frailty, the fragility, the humanity of its characters really seriously. But I think the suitors aren't treated seriously enough. They're written off as lustful men who merely greedily seek Penelope's body as well as her money, her estate, the estate of the supposedly dead Ulysses. But I think today those suitors are far more interesting characters. And I think they're far more interesting characters if they are not just three greedy men, but they're actually representatives of a much bigger crowd, a crowd of people who, like Ulysses, are searching for their Ithaca. They're searching for a home, a place where their journeys, as a consequence of the war, can come to an end. And so I think by adding a chorus, I think the political dimension of the piece opens up, and I think the relationship of the suitors to Penelope becomes even richer.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So sadly, that's all we've got time for tonight. We've had loads of comments on YouTube. I don't know if we've got any more. If we've got some more, I'm going to read them out. Okay, so Alan on YouTube said he's part of the Royal Opera House community chorus, and he's very excited to be a part of the choir. We've got another one. How wonderful to be 6,000 miles away. Okay, so there's someone that's 6,000 miles away and they're watching this. Amazing. Hello to you.
That's a good journey home, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you don't need to take the train, nothing. And And lastly, Jennifer on YouTube said it's cool to understand these great performances and how they came to be. So thank you for those comments. The Return of the Ulysses will be at the Roundhouse between the 10th and the 21st of January, and tickets and details are all on the website. Thank you to our guests for joining us tonight, and my wonderful co-presenter, Roderick Williams, who will be in it. And a big thanks to our wonderful audience here at the Roundhouse, and to all of you watching on YouTube. Good night.
Good night.